So, the topic is, how do I talk to myself? So this is really, in a way, it's quite personal. And in another way, it's really general, in the sense that I think that the way I talk to myself personally is relevant in terms of approaches and principles and attitudes generally to everybody. So I think initially I was very affected by, when I was young, hearing, oh, if you're talking to yourself, it's the first sign of madness. So I had to get over that and realize that actually it's not true. In a way, it's exactly the opposite. It's I would say, almost a sign of sanity, or a way of becoming sane. And also, in a way, we're always talking to ourselves. We're always making commentary, giving ourselves commands, asking ourselves questions. So I think that when I think back to my early years, I had to find my own voice for the way that I talked to myself, rather than my mother's or Sangharakshita's or someone else's, a teacher's voice saying, do this, or you're that, or whatever. I had to find my own attitude and in a way, emotional tenor of the way that I approach myself rather than other people's. And I feel that this is I feel that that was very important. That I noticed when I started teaching I was thrown in the deep end, basically. I mean, really deep end. I've been meditating for quite a few years, but I'd never taught. And Sangharakshita was going to lead a retreat in Holland, a big retreat, and then at the very last minute pulled out and just said, you're going to do it. And I'd never led a class at all. And it was a 10-day retreat, 40 people. I was, 23? I was the youngest person on the retreat by a really long way, and probably the least educated in every way. And I noticed in the first half, I was talking with Sangharakshita's voice, Bantu's voice, how he would say things. And it just didn't work. You know, there was a coup, actually. There was a rebellion. 3 people tried to take over the retreat. It was a big, serious moment where they said, no, he's not good enough, we want to do it. And I'd gone over to Holland, especially to do it. So, fortunately, there was enough support for the coup to fail. And then I realized I had to find my voice. And I talked with every single of the 40 people individually in a room and spoke to them directly, and then realized I actually did have a voice. I did have my own thoughts, and I wasn't just parroting what Sangharakshita. I didn't need to parrot Sangharakshita or have his tone of voice in the way that he talked, which I had had before, because I knew nothing else, in a way. So then things really changed. I realized that the way that I asked myself questions, told myself what to do, it had to be with my own thinking and my own initiative. And as a result of my own reflection on things, not just because I was following a menu or a format given by somebody else. You do this, you think that, you do that. I had to think it, and I decided quite young, really, that I was going to keep the initiative for everything and check it with the Dharma. Did it fit? Yes, it fits. Good. Okay. So when I think about it now, there are a couple of things that come to mind about how I talk to myself. And not just in meditation, although there is a certain amount of talking to myself in meditation, but actually outside of the meditation as well. And very simply put, there are two categories of talking to myself, very simply put. One is questions and answers in a way, and the other is commands, telling me what to do. So there's levels in all of that. So one level is the tone of voice. So I think that kind and curious is the tone that I always want when I'm asking myself what's happening, rather than harsh and presumptuous. You're always like that. And rather harsh. So I'm always looking for the questions like, what is actually here, and what's going on, and how do you feel? What's your thinking like? What's your energy like at the moment? Are you all here? Are you happy to be here and doing what you're doing? These are sort of very basic questions, but the tone is really important. I make sure that there's no background punitive, but you always do that. That's a stupid thing to do. No harshness. I have, over the years, I think I've been pretty good at eradicating that harshness, because I really looked out for it, because it's just so damaging, really, and unuseful. So I just want to check something. Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Okay. So there's the tone, and then in a way there's this thing about positive direction in the way that I tell myself to do things. I learned pretty young, actually, to drop or to be aware of how I framed commands to myself. And I noticed I'd picked up socially, and probably from the family, my mother perhaps, don't do that, don't do this. So it was all negatively put, rather than do this, notice that, be aware of that, which is more progressive and positive in direction. And when I took on the task of noticing how I gave myself commands, either negatively and double negatives and negatives, don't not do that, and I was really shocked how deep that negative approach to telling myself to do things went. It took me a year to eradicate, on the case, all the time. And I was very, very determined I was going to turn it around, to notice this and find how else could that be done, or what would help here, rather than don't do that, which is just negative and not direct enough. and more awareness-based commands. Notice what helps. Notice what happens when you do that. So I really took it on, actually. And I think it's one of the best things I ever did. And not the best thing, but one of them. I feel that it's part of the reason why I feel that I'm always progressing, if I'm honest. Because I can feel absolutely confident that when I, say give myself a command to do something, that it will be progressive and I'll learn from it, rather than being negative and holding me back, or very simply confusing me. I think one of the things about the statement, don't think too much, is the mind has to think about not thinking. It isn't direct. The mind wants just a direct notice when you're thinking a lot and calm it down. Very direct. Yeah. Broaden your awareness from thinking to the body. Very direct, rather than stop thinking or don't think. Which is like, it's too round the houses for the mind. The mind goes, I just honestly can't be bothered with it. You can tell me what he likes, I'm not going to do it because I don't understand him. So this was very important to me, coming to very clear, direct, awareness-based language when I told myself to do things. And so that's part of how I talk to myself. It's very, I'm very clear. There are part of how I talk to myself is I have questions. There was a time when I had to ask myself all the time, what am I feeling? And it was a really important question. I could tell you what I was thinking about, but I couldn't tell you what I was feeling, my emotional state. So I had this whole period, it was quite a long time, 6 months maybe, where every day I would just be asking that question. What am I feeling about this? And coming into the body's sense of feeling as well. And so that way of asking myself questions, how am I, what's going on, how am I feeling, it develops over time as I sort of noticed more things. What's my imagination doing? Is it creating delusions or illusions, or is it giving me good feedback? So I'll give a simple example of that. I've often talked here about metaphorical questions. So if you imagine yourself as being a lake and you ask yourself, if I'm a lake now, what kind of lake am I? And you just open to the imagination. And you get used to this. So who got a lake? Just put your hand up. Some lakes. Okay, so it's a very good question to start asking yourself, to get used to metaphor, where the image-making part of the mind shows you, that's the operative word here, what's going on. And there could be a lot going on which is conveyed in an image. There might be ruffled waves on the surface, it might be stiller underneath. It could be quite shallow, it could be dark, it could be murky, it could be reflecting light or not, all kinds of things. It could be expansive or narrow. And somehow or another, you can start to trust, or I believe you can start to trust the imaginative side of your mind to give you a true picture, where you go, yeah, actually, that's just what I'm like now. That's actually exactly right. That fits. On the other hand, your imagination might give you all kinds of delusions about yourself, which you definitely shouldn't trust. When you imagine yourself in a situation and then you ask yourself, but really, would I do that? Would I stand up to those 5 people with knives, or would I do that? No, definitely not. I'd run. So, just as an example. So you start to get an awareness of how you ask yourself questions, asking questions of the body, of the imagination, like the metaphorical question, questions of your thinking mind. Sometimes, like say for example, when I was coming here, I was thinking, is my mind clear enough to do this before a cup of coffee? Oh, actually, amazingly, it was. I was really surprised, actually. I usually need a cup of coffee for all my brain synapses to work, but it was working. So I thought, fine, I can just relax because my brain is actually functioning. I can look for a word and it'll come, which is actually quite a good thing to know about how you are. There's another level of asking questions of oneself, which I think it's easy to miss. And the question is, what's missing in me? What's missing? So I might be very sort of practically minded at any given time, very clear, but actually I'm not in touch with my body or my feelings. So that's what's missing, or my mythological aspect. I'm throwing things out here now. It's quite a lot, but I'm just giving you, in a way, an impression of the things that one can be aware of. And so, what is my myth of the moment? What is my archetype of the moment? Well, at the moment, my myth is communicator. That is my archetype of the moment. Someone who's communicating and articulating processes. And that's very, very useful. I mean, Jung would be very proud of me. Know your archetype, young man, with an Austrian accent. And so it's like, do I have an archetype at the moment? What is my archetype at the moment? It's an enriching question, for example. So obviously I don't do all that before breakfast. That would be a bit much. But, over time, I do have the sense of all the different faculties, thinking, feeling, imagination, intuition. Am I in touch with my intuition or not? A bit, maybe, perhaps, and get a sense, picture, idea, feeling of where I am, what's missing. I thought of this very strongly when I was thinking about that anecdote of Sangharakshita was going to do the retreat and decided not to. It was a very big deal for him. He had started Sri Ratna, or the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, as it was called then, about 7 years ago, and he'd basically been doing everything, all the talks, making the tea, everything. And he had been thinking about the direction of the movement, creating something completely new and original. And he had a dream, actually, which I'm not going to tell the dream, but basically it was something is missing. which is the spontaneous, intuitive, more mystical side. And it came to him like that this is what's missing in my life. And he stopped everything. He decided to leave London, leave all of us new little baby fledglings order members. It was a really small order then. It was like, more like 8 of us. You know, it was, from a sensible point of view, it's ridiculous. And that he wasn't going to lead the retreat. It was because he, in a way, asked himself what's missing. So he went and lived in a little cabin on a cliff overlooking the sea in Cornwall, something where he could re-engage with what was missing. And then he didn't do anything really for quite a while, and then gradually started teaching, giving talks again, leading retreats. We led retreats together. I'd do the meditation side, he'd do the Dharma side. And then he just, everything came together for him. He was in touch again with everything. So that, in a way, that's just an illustration of that question. What's missing? So periodically, it's good to ask. A question I love to ask myself is that really true? And then sometimes I get, no, it's not. I think that, but it's not true. I think that's the right way of doing things, but no, it's not true. And then that gives me an opportunity to reassess things, not just be in, fixed or conditioned opinions which I took from someone else, inherited ideas, you could say. No, actually, I don't believe that. I don't think it's true. It's not true. I don't think that will doing that on its own will make me happy on its own. It's not true. So in that way, just asking that question, is it true, is part of the way that I talk to myself. It's part of the internal dialogue that helps me gain a more realistic and deeper clarity, I think. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that you'll think of your own questions. And I think that's good. Not just my questions, not just the things that I've said, but what you could think for yourself, what questions would I want to ask myself? Yeah. And is that true? In your own way, finding your own ways. But I think I'd finish with a simple guideline, really, that think of this as a long-term project, that you're setting up protocols of how you talk to yourself over many decades, so that the protocols are just there. You don't have to think all the time very rationally what's missing. It just sort of happens much more intuitively because you've been doing it. You've laid down the protocols, the patterns, as it were. And I don't mean habit, here. It's not habit. It's more just ways of doing things. And so what happens is that when you do it more consciously in the beginning and you take it on, asking yourself questions and giving yourself commands, and does that help? Has it got the right tone? Could I be kinder in the way that I tell myself what to do? It embeds itself in your mind which is, I'd say, is brilliant. Really, really brilliant over time. It's just fantastic. You don't have to keep thinking it. We're just there. And it'll just wink, 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 keep coming up when it needs to. And then it's a much more intuitive process. And intuitive thinking, these are my last words, intuitive thinking is a combination of all your different faculties, your rational thinking, your physical instinctive, your emotional, lessons learned. The intuitive, as it were, brings them all together and just gives you an answer. And part of how I speak to myself and listen is intuitively. Okay, so that's it.